Television reinvented.
It's a beautiful Wednesday, the 8th of September in the year 2021. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of People and the State. I'm your host. My name is Andrew Mwans. Now, Africa is rich in gold, diamonds, oil, and many other converted natural resources. Yet it has not managed to capitalize on its wealth. Its infrastructure is underdeveloped. Its economies are small and very unsophisticated. Its people languish in abject poverty. Africa's economic performance remains dismal, and prospects for the new millennium are very much bleak. The continent, consisting of 54 countries, is the least developed continent of the third world, despite its possessing immense wealth of mineral and natural resources. Compared with third world, development indicators of Africa have lagged persistently behind. For example, in 1997, GDP per capita for Africa was $560 compared to $4,230 for Latin America and $730 for Asia. Economic growth rates in Africa in the 1970s averaged only about 4 to 5%, while Latin America recorded a 6 and 7% growth rate. In 1986 to 1993, the continent's real GNP per capita declined 0.7%, while the average for the third world increased by 2.7%. For Africa, real income per capita dropped by 14.6% from its level in 1965, making most African worse off than they were at independence. On tonight's edition of People and the State, I'm privileged to be joined in by Prince Kashambatwa Mbikusita-Lewanika, a founding member of the Movement for Multi-Party Democracy, former presidential advisor for political affairs under President Rupia Banda, and former managing director at Tanzania-Zambia Railway Authority. Doc, good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of People and the State.
Good evening. Thank you very, very much for inviting me. I look forward to our discussion.
Well, tonight we look at why Africa is still underdeveloped. And we'll get to the bottom of this conversation. But when I was reading your CV, and me and you were laughing even before we started, that your CV is full of former this, former that, former this. But I guess...
And yet I'm still alive.
And yet you're still alive. And probably I could have left out also some of the, your credentials as well as some of your works that you've done for this beautiful country.
Yes. No doubt you left some, but that's all right. Let's discuss. The topic is very, very important.
The topic is very important.
Yes, I'm an African, and you're talking about Africa, so I'm a stakeholder.
Indeed. Let's begin off by understanding why other countries are rich, how they became rich, and why other countries are poor and they remain poor.
I want to take off from one reference you said, that the statistics you concluded lead to the conclusion that many Africans are worse off than they were at independence. So that I think the starting point is where were they at independence. In fact, we should say where were they before our interaction with Europe. Secondly, I think the definition of development, when you say we are underdeveloped, it's very important that we should understand that underdevelopment is not a state of nature. The world was not created with underdeveloped people. So we don't start being underdeveloped and then make efforts to become developed. Underdevelopment itself is a process of negating the development of people. In other words, there is a process of underdevelopment. And I hope we won't belabor that too much, but let's just say simply, why are others rich? It's very straightforward. Why America is rich? It's rich precisely because of our poverty. In other words, our interaction with North America, with Western Europe in particular, but not only that, over the last 500 years, has been based on an unequal exchange, whereby the goods that came from Africa to that world are undervalued, and the goods that come from there in exchange are overvalued, which means at every round of exchange, we become underdeveloped. And that is the process of underdevelopment. Our underdevelopment is the flip side of their development. The development of Europe, the development of North America is precisely related to the underdevelopment of Africa. The exploitation of Africa.
Who has created this an ecosystem, really?
Oh, of course, the beneficiary of the system created it for themselves. We are the victims of it. We've been the victims of it. You talked about people are worse off at independence. That's very important, because what was the purpose of independence? The purpose of independence as an integral part of the African freedom movement, which starts earlier, was to reverse this unequal exchange, to sort of reverse the impact of being colonized. And we have to understand what colonialism means. Colonialism means two things: to take away the power of self-governance from people, and to take away the people's command over their land and natural resources. And that is what the mission of independence was supposed to be, to make us govern ourselves, to be independent self-governors, and to be able to take control of our land and natural resources. That is precisely what has failed, and that is what those statistics actually mean. Because the independence we got, in fact, sometimes they actually accurately say we were granted independence.
We didn't struggle and fight for it.
We struggled, but finally they granted it. And they granted it in a process where they took charge of the decolonized. And they made sure that at the end of that process, their interests remained intact, and our position in relation to them remained the same. And this is why we are talking about neocolonialism.
Yeah, of course.
So that now this is embedded in the system of economic management and the systems of governance. Independence, unfortunately, did not transform the economic system from the exploitative one. The independence did not actually bring about an African system of governance. Indeed, independence was based on territories and population gathered together and made by the departing colonialists, so that the Zambias, the Malawis, the Kenyans, these are not organic African countries. Their economy are not organic African economies. We ourselves, we inherited from colonialism a copper-dominated economy, for instance. Now, we mined copper and we processed copper. We had some use for copper, bracelets and a little exchange of money. But our use of copper did not require us to build an open pit mine. Those who built open pit mine and deep mines had their own uses for copper, which was not for us. We were not the market. We did not demand to have those copper mines, and they were not there to save us. And the economic system is such that the production system itself and the ownership structures themselves are such that they only require a limited number of us, indigenous Africans, as laborers. In the first place, as the lowest laborers, the least paid laborers. For management, we imported. For machinery, we imported. For the market, we depended outside. So that now we...
That was during colonialism.
It's still the case now.
Yes.
That is the problem, that we did not transform.
Even
so that
after.
even when we nationalized,
Yeah.
we kept the same system. When we reprivatized,
we kept the same system.
the same system.
Before we
And
get
the
deeper
end result
into
is the same.
neo-colonialism, let's get to understand the status of Africa before colonialism. Was Africa rich before colonialism, or it was still perhaps how it is today?
Well, rich is relative. In other words, the difference between Africa and Europe 500, 600 years ago was not as wide as it is now. And the width of that difference is a result of this unequal exchange. This is what has created this gap. So basically we are poorer as a whole. Now, the other aspect, we don't even have to go 500 years ago. I have just, in 2013, moved back to Barosland.
Of course.
And it is quite clear that many of our people in their home states are definitely poorer than they were in 1960. Their housing conditions are poorer, their hygienic conditions are poorer, their diets are poorer, their production capacity are poorer. Now, that also is related to the economic system, because this economic system which dominates does not require all of us in it. It requires a few of us. But those few of us it requires are essential to the economy from which we are being taken away, the traditional economy. 600 years ago, like most of Europe, even most of Africa, the production system was not capitalist. It was a peasant subsidiary, mostly subsidiary economy. They only started moving away from subsidiary as a result of their adventures towards conquering and butchering natives and stealing our resources to do that. That is where it is. So that I think to move to a more positive thing, what can we do? You see, I don't want us to just be victims.
But you've mentioned something very profound, Doc, and I want to find out from you. You said, look at independence, most African countries were doing quite well. Don't you think what could have justified that is probably the population at the time? And now the population has grown 5 and 20 times than it was at independence.
No. I think let's take Zambia, a very specific example of Zambia.
Of course.
That the majority of our people were in rural areas. They were not rich the way you would consider a rich man, but they were feeding themselves. That's why the generation ahead of me are taller than I am. Which means that when we went into colonialism, there was something we weren't missing. So they were able to fend for themselves. They were utilizing their land and natural resources properly, and also looking after it for future generation. Some of our culture and values which are looked down upon, which we have abandoned, were the ones that made sure that generation after generation found land and natural resources intact for them to live, even at that subsidiary, at that minimal level. But potentially they could then develop because they have land to do that. So that is part of the focus that I think, in order to redeem our situation, we have to go back to look at land and natural resources. We have to say that development or progress or richness cannot come to all our people who are peasants by finding jobs, because there will never be jobs for them. It can only be found by them utilizing and increasing their capacity to utilize the land and natural resources upon which they reside. The idea that in order for you to develop, you have to sell your land is part of our problem. Because land itself is so valuable that it's more valuable than absolutely anything that you can put on it. So whether you put a mine or a factory on a land, that land is more valuable than that factory and that mine that is there. Which means that if your so-called investors come and create a mine or create a factory, and then you give them your land, in exchange for consumable, either money or cars or bribes or things like that, that your future generation will not find. But meanwhile, you have given over the land which their future generation will find and which will continue breeding and regenerating for them, not for you. So that part of our poverty is to do with the land rights that we have given away cheaply. It is explained in Black America that this discrepancy between the wealth of African Americans and European Americans is actually partly related to land. In other words, when slavery was ended, there was a promise that the liberated slaves will each be given some acres of land and a mule. If that had been done, it means that in the middle of the 19th century, they would have had property to work on. But since they weren't given land, they had to remain as sharecroppers, working other people's land with no stake in the business. And anyways, because of mistreatment, they end up leaving. So even in Africa itself, with this colonialism, what has happened is that we have sent signals that for you to advance, you have to leave your village.
You have to invite more investors to invest in your country and create
And
jobs.
then you invite them in exchange for land. In other words, I don't mind you inviting investors, but we should have proper negotiation. That yes, you are bringing cars, you are bringing machineries, you are bringing cash, you are bringing skills. Yes, that is valuable. But we are bringing land, which is more valuable than anything. So anything built on our own country, on Africa, should at least at the beginning, and only at the beginning, but at least be 50% owned by us as stakeholders, not as employees or just recipients of tax, but as stakeholders, because then it means we have a fair share of our wealth. Otherwise, if we continue the same system where we are selling our land and losing control, then we are losing the fight, which was the meaning of the struggle for independence, was for Africans to have control over land and natural resources. That is the basis of the economy. I always say that, and I take this from Mwalimu Nyerere, that you see, development doesn't come from money. It's money that comes from development. Development itself comes from land and natural resources. So those who control land and natural resources are the ones that determine the development. And they are the ones that get the money. And that is why they keep getting richer and richer than those from whom they've taken away that land.
Can we do without the international community? Can we do without investors coming to invest in our country, taking our land and creating jobs for us? Because you talk about the impact that colonialism did have on Africa and why it's underdeveloped.
First and foremost,
and you spoke about the new type of colonialism.
There's nothing wrong with international relationship or engaging with international. It's how you engage with them. Our engagement must be fair. One of the fair position that has to be negotiated is that if we are bringing land, how can it be that what is built on our land is an entity in which we have zero shareholding? That is not fair. And it doesn't help us. I remember when during the privatization, one of the enthusiastic privatizers went to Barosland. And he came back to Saka. Aka, your land is so beautiful, that plain. If we could bring investors. So I said that. But have you looked at Johannesburg? It's full of investors. They've been there for centuries. Why is Malema talking about white monopoly capital? Why are our people poor in Johannesburg with this investment? So it's not that investment is wrong, but there are some wrong investment. And the investments we've been inviting are in many ways the wrong investment because they are not fair to our people. We are impoverishing our people while catering for the demands of this so-called investment. But at the end of the day, our people are poorer and poorer. And meanwhile, the few of us who are required to assist them get richer than us are being taken away from our rural areas where we could also assist to increase production and increase that economy which is organically related to our land and natural resources and which we command. No? So that is part of the challenges, that we need an economic system in which the majority of our people are active participants and get a fair reward for their participation and a fair reward for their resources, which are basically land and natural resources. Nobody should become richer from your investment.
Prince Doc, from where I'm seated, what you're speaking does not sound very technical. And this is what African countries are supposed to be doing and should do. Why haven't we woken up as Africa?
Because
we decided to take that
basically
path?
We are still colonized first and foremost in the mind. Like the question you asked, can we do without investors? Can you imagine a normal human being in your home and your children asking you, Daddy, can we run our home alone?
Realistically, can we?
But you see, if you can't, the solution is not to bring another man to your house. The solution is that what is it that you can do for yourself? That is number one. So in our investment, one of the challenges we have is the starting point, that we should be solving our problems. We have bills and bills, acts of parliament, acts of legislation all over Africa, targeted on how to please these foreign investors. There is probably zero bill about what we can do for our own people in their homestead to increase their production, to increase the quality of their production, to add value to their production, to be in command of their livelihood, at the very least to be able to feed themselves. And this is what every African community was able to do by and large, except when there's a drought or something. But under a normal year, at the very least, we could feed ourselves. Now, if you have a car and half of your people can't feed yourself, you may think you are becoming richer. But it's not so. It's either development for all of us or it's not development at all. That is number one. And genuine development must be self-development. It must be a development in which we are engaged in. It must be a development we determine. It must be a development we command. So that the starting point should be, what do we want? Now, of what we want, what can we provide for ourselves? And we have the responsibility to stretch our minds to maximize what we need we provide for ourselves. Then what of what we need do we need from other people? We should determine that out of what I want, taking into account what I can do for myself, what I need from outsiders is this. Then we should be inviting outsiders to say, no, we want to do this. We can do this part of it for ourselves. From you guys, we want you to fit into our plan. Not that the investor himself is going around Zambia, then goes to State House to tell you that, oh, actually there is a mine here, I want to start a mine, I want to start this, so that we start now chasing other people's dreams instead of building our own plans. That is start number one.
I remember on that very start, Prince Lewanika, do you see the political will by most African countries to go by that?
it's worse than political will. I don't see the mindset. You see, so many of our people are truly colonized. They don't even believe that we can feed ourselves. Look at, I think one of these days we should take an inventory of this donation that we are getting from donors. Do we really need them? You are in the media. Donors give us donation to buy airtime, Moya, to announce that thugs should not be beating up their wives, sponsored by USAID. Do we really need it? 2 weeks ago, I was with some area in Dunas in Barosiland, and we had very good meetings trying to say what we can do for ourselves. And when we finished, they thank you that we have finished in time today, because in fact I've just been invited. I've just been called by the Dutch. There is an organization they have assisted us to form in which they've made me chairman. So what organization is that? It's a gender-based violence. So I say, Induna, you are a senior Induna. Under you there are other 7 Indunas. It was a very specific Slalo area.
Of course.
With a Slalo Induna who has 7 sub-Indunas and who has 26 villages with village headmen. So, and those villages have families and heads of families. So I say, the heads of your families, the heads of your villages, your 7 sub-Slalo Indunas, and yourselves, really you can't get together if you have identified that you have a problem of gender-based violence. Do you need a 26-year-old Dutch girl to come and organize you against that? So many of these donations are actually retarding our minds. They are retarding our minds. They are giving things we can do. We are in such a terrible state that donors can actually take 7 pieces of laptops and present them to Zambia through State House with cameras and a lot of thanks. Is it true that Zambia can't afford that? So we have not first sat down. One, what do we ourselves want? Ourselves. I remember I was going to say that when we reintroduced planning, in fact, we never really reintroduced it, but when we tried to reintroduce it, and the donors conceded, even the bull sessions before the planning starts, those committee meetings, each committee meeting had a donor, so-called. And the donors are not your ambassador from Kenya. You know that.
Yes.
Huh? The donors are very special people in the world who are donors, and we are supposed to be the donees. So that even, we never even had a single start-up committee say we are just Zambians. What do we want? There was always a donor there. And each time some Zambian dreamer would say we want this and that, the donor would say, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, but we have met as donors and we think that sort of thing cannot be funded. Then we leave it. They curtail our dreams. And then they bring their donor programs which are related to their own politics there. It could be homosexual politics. I'm not against homosexuals. I think that everybody has their human rights. But that is not our agenda. But they put that. They put conditionalities. We are the ones who are supposed to decide what we want and decide what we want from outside and the conditions in which we can accept what we want from outside.
Another issue that is highlighted as one of the key issues that has underdeveloped Africa is an aspect of religion. From your own point of view, to what extent do you think really religion has added to the underdevelopment of this continent of Africa?
I've no idea, except that, you see, unfortunately, some of the religions that we have, which are now dominating us, are foreign religions. So they come in a big package. In other words, they are not just trying to get your passage to heaven. Huh? They come in a big package which reinforces our inferiority complex, convinces us that we didn't know God, that Jesus is white, that our culture is primitive and ungodly, so that you start off by having a culture. It doesn't have to be religion, it can be any culture, which first says negate who you are, what you are. Everything that you are without us is rubbish. Now, some of the things they rejected are things that now they are beginning to say, no, that's all right. So that now some of the donation we get is Europeans sending little girls to teach African women breastfeeding. You can understand. And we accept that. There's a donation, a nice workshop on breastfeeding among Africans. After five decades of teaching us that breastfeeding is dirty, is bad, is primitive, you should be feeding people with these chemicals rather than milk and that sort of thing. Then they turn around. The same with organic food. Our economy was based on organic food.
Of course.
They introduced these dangerous chemicals called fertilizers. And then hook us to them. Later on, we discover they are destroying our soil. Later on, we discover that we can't afford them. Later on, we discover that there is no economic basis in which you can develop agriculture based on chemical agriculture. And in addition to that, that the use of chemical agriculture, GMOs and so on, are actually destroying your base.
Prince, where does this inferiority complex by Africans to think that they are below the white come from?
Well,
is that how God created,
it's
a
fact that we were conquered. And when you are conquered, you have to really first clean up your mind to regain your manhood, so to speak. And we are taking too damn long to clean up our minds. But that is where the key problem is. You can imagine people convincing you that the color of your skin is not beautiful. The shape of your nose is not beautiful. Not speaking French and English is being dull. So those things we have to overcome. We have to overcome. The independence movement, the liberation movement, the African liberation movement is part and parcel, has to have an integral part, has to have an element of cultural reassertion. We have to revive our culture, our values, reassert ourselves, our pride, our responsibilities for ourselves. However, we are talking about the economy.
Of course.
Now, the economic system we have adopted, if we don't transform it, we will never be able to control it. Because it was not built for us to control. It was not built to cater for us. We are not the market for our own copper. We are not the market for the things we are having. And we are concentrating on producing things for other people while neglecting production of things we can do for ourselves. In the 70s, it was popular in my generation. One of the popular sayings that the problem with Africa is that we produce what we don't consume and consume what we don't produce. Now, the price we pay for what we don't produce, which we consume, is higher than the price we get paid of what we produce, which we don't consume. That is this. I go back to this recurring gap making, so that at every round of exchanging what we produce for what we consume, we are always in the negative.
Let's get to our geographical position as Africa. Are we well placed for development as a continent?
Yeah, of course. See, well, the colonization of our mind even starts it's about geography. Hardly any of us have ever seen an accurate map of the world. the maps we see show Africa as being smaller than Europe, show Africa as being smaller than America. And it shows Europe on top of the world. Now, if the globe is a globe, who decides what is the top? And who decides how to shape it to fit that globe? Is it an accident that just in that geographical presentation, we are not participants in map drawing? And we are not the center of our world. But the natural thing and the history of the world is that every person, every community, every people are the center of the world. And for them to be mentally healthy, they cannot afford to think that they are on the margins of the world or that they are not the center of the world. That's why even in our economic plan, we must be the center of that economic plan. We must be in the driver's seat. We must determine that. And we must even determine what role those who are not us have to play. And we are the ones who should set their condition. Instead, we are the ones waiting for them to set conditions for doing their own things on our own soil.
Is it possible to change, the economic system? Because we now live in a global village. We live in a global village where we are interdependent on each other.
The world was always interdependent. There's nothing new about that. What is new is that there are global villages in which there is justice and global villages in which there is injustice. There are global villages in which the arrangements are exploitative against some people and beneficial to other people. So even if we are all in the global village, we must be in the driving seat of this global village. We can't just say we are in a global village with the rules determined by other people. That our mission is to fit into their plans, to fit into their globe. If we are all in a global village, then this globe is ours also. And we must not be second to anybody. One of the mission of the independence movement, the African liberation movement, was that at the end of this struggle, an African should be second to nobody. Second to nobody. In everything. In everything. We don't have to be superior to anybody. We don't have to be a superpower against anybody, like all these thugs who run the world at present. But we should be second to nobody in morally, how we think of ourselves, how we bring up our children, how we run our economy, how we govern ourselves.
An African now has placed hope and trust in political leaders, and that's the reason why even during elections, Africans turn out in numbers to vote with the hope that those elected to the positions of the land would change the trajectory of an African country. Yet little has been done. Is it a problem of leadership, or is it a problem again of the system that you continuously speak about?
It's a problem of a system, because you see, an election takes place in a system. In other words, you are voting for a councillor, you are voting for an MP, you are voting for a president within a certain constitution that determines that system.
Of course.
So, although we fool ourselves that we are voting for change, in fact, you are voting to have the status quo managed by different people, but the same status quo. In other words, when you cast your vote, it does not change the constitution unless you consciously make it your mission that we are changing the constitution. We are changing the system of governance. We are changing the system of the economy. And unfortunately, most of our elections assume that the system is okay, except that, maybe Mr. Banda there was a thief, Mr. Mvita there was incompetent, that once we have different people running the same system. But I'm saying the system we are in, was not built by us. It was not built for us. It has never worked for us. It will never work for us. Whether you run it efficiently or not, this economic system we have adopted will never, never, never employ every employable person. And if we are introducing people to this economy in exchange for their loss of control over their land, then we are actually throwing them down the drain. So that one of the problems of elections is that there are status quo management mechanism. They are not inherently a revolutionary thing unless you purposely make them so. In other words, unless out of the election you elect a revolutionary program that is there to transform the system. If you are electing the managers of the status quo, yes, there may be improvement here and there for some, but for the majority of our people, there would not be.
I'd like to get your comment on international programs like in this regard, the IMF, right, giving bailout packages to African countries, and how that could help an African country to get out of poverty. I do know for a fact that we've been pursuing an IMF program as a country. To dismantle our debt.
When someone says they are coming to bail you out, you should ask, you are bailing me out from what?
Debt.
The debt you owe who? Who is being bailed out? When we reach the epic point, who was bailed out? Those we owed money because it became impractical. Fidel Castro says it is mathematically unrepayable. So everybody realized it's not repayable. So they decided to rearrange the cards. But convince us that they are doing us because they love us. That they are bailing us out. They are bailing their damn selves. It is their banks that are waiting for that money. So they had to rearrange the cards so that the stream of money that goes to them, can be restarted. It does not solve our problem. It does not solve our problem. And it's not intended to solve our problem. And it's not based on us having sat down. Say, what do we want to do? What is our plan? Our plan. Not what is the ideal economic plan, how can we be Hong Kong? No. Ourselves. Have we ever sat down for our plan? Which is independent of the world? Out of that plan, have we ever sat down to say, no, let's scratch our heads and maximize identifying what of what we want we can provide for ourselves? And that as human beings with our dignity, we shouldn't let someone to be feeding us when we can feed ourselves, to be doing for us things that we can do for ourselves in our own countries, on our own African soil. We haven't done that. We expect external salvation. And those we are calling on to bail us out, as you put it, have their agenda. They are not agendaless. What has it gained Africans? To be liberated from the French, from the British, only to be dependent on the IMF and the World Bank, controlled by the British and the French and the American. In other words, we are being liberated from these weak, isolated imperialist centers. And we think we are being bailed out by being placed now in the hands of their cooperative imperialism. If the IMF was a democratic society, since we are members of the IMF, superficially, we are a state member, isn't it?
Of course.
And all state members are equal. But in practice, is that the truth? Is that the truth?
It's not.
It's not the truth. So that unless the World Bank was truly a World Bank run by the world, on democratic lines, unless the IMF was democratic, unless the UN was democratic, then we can't put all our eggs on this undemocratic institution created by other people to solve their problem. We went to the same schools, so we should know why the IMF was created, why the World Bank was created. Why were they created the same year? Why were they created in the same place? They had the same purpose. Were we thought of then? We were not in the program for setting up this. We just joined. They give you a flag, you are independent, you apply for membership, sit in UN, membership of the IMF, and so on. Meanwhile, the arrangement, they've agreed among themselves, almost the same way that Europeans and Americans agreed in 1884-85 to petition Africa. They've met somewhere else and agreed that when it comes to the head of the World Bank, the Americans can take that. The head of the IMF, the Europeans can take that. When it comes to the Security Council, every other European country is a member of the Security Council, a permanent member. But no African state is a member. Even when we beg to be members, Prince, we are saying, oh, can you give us two seats?
We could go on and on.
It's almost like FIFA.
Yeah.
That every European country can qualify to the World Cup. Then Africans, today they'll say, okay, 4 of you, 8 of you, 9 of you, and occasionally they can even put an African as head of FIFA. But the FIFA arrangement itself is not an African arrangement.
Prince, I wish you could go on and on, but time is really not our best ally. Thank you so much for having made time to speak to us.
Thank you so much
people on the state
for getting an old man out of Mungu to exercise his mind a little bit. And I think the questions that we raise are very, very important.
Indeed.
And I noticed that of all the manifestos we had, that question was not asked, was not answered. Just going back to your question about why are elections not leading to change? Because the contest is over issues that are not fundamental. The real fundamental issue, our place in the world, our economic system, our governance system, are not up for questioning. We are just fighting over positions within the same system, rather than fighting to change a system that our mission, our heritage, is to change.
Well, we've been discussing why Africa is still underdeveloped. My guest has been Prince Akashambaka Mbikusita-Lewanika. My name is Andrew Mwansa, and this is People on the State.
Thank you very much.
Diamond TV, television reinvented.
With the new Move-It Relaxer Cream, I get to wear my hair just like I live my life. The newly improved Move-It Relaxer has a moisture lock ingredient that guarantees stronger, longer, healthy hair. So beat the stereotype. Go naturally curly, bouncy, or straight. Don't be